Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about indie film post-production, and my guest is the founder and CEO of Sugar Studios, producer Gijo Reed. Gijo, welcome to Below the Line.
Thanks, Skid. Good morning.
Indeed. Glad you're here, Gijo. To start us off, tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to the world of post-production.
Well, I can first say that I was born and raised in Los Angeles. So I've been kind of adjacent to this industry for my whole life. My grandfather was an actor. My uncle was a choreographer and dancer. So I kind of, just by living and growing up here, the entertainment industry is through osmosis gets in everybody's life here in one way or another with someone or someone in your family or whatnot. And, I grew up in Studio City in the Valley here. And when I was a teenager, after graduating high school and a few years of college, I took a shot at trying to become an actor. I got some commercials, this few random jobs here and there. And an actor friend of mine asked me if I wanted more of a steady job that was being a driver for a company that produced movie trailers. This was a company called Intralink in Beverly Hills. And this was around 1989, where I said, acting's not cutting it. I was a waiter at Jerry's Deli in Studio City, and that was a nightmare.
Even getting shifts there. There's so many actors that are doing great work there.
In fact, by the time I finally memorized that menu, I think they fired me. That menu was like 10 pages long. So I started being a messenger, and basically it was a trailer house that did editing and finishing. It did the creative concepting for both key art, movie posters and ads, and also did the trailers and TV spots for movies. So I fell right into this company and I had no idea who they were. It was just my friend worked there, and they happened to be one of the premier places that did only A-list top amazing films. They did, in fact, one movie that comes to mind was Thelma and Louise was the first movie I remember just seeing them working on. And it was interesting because when you're creating trailers for films, you're working on the footage before the movie comes out. So nobody really knows just what an impact these films will have. So it was pretty cool to kind of just be staring at dailies, in the edit bays and just seeing this raw footage and then seeing these amazing editors create trailers out of this footage with the time code windows and the burn-ins and the no color, and it looks flat and the sound is all over the place. And then the movie comes out and you're like, wow, this is everywhere. You see billboards and bus stop ads and TV spots on TV, and you're sitting in the theater and you see a trailer for a movie that I was, in a sense, a part of because I was working within this company and shuttling tapes back and forth to the studios. So that was a cool experience for a number of reasons. And actually, I'm spending a little bit of time on that in this conversation because it definitely correlates to where I am today as far as the model of my current company. So yeah, I definitely got the bug for the technical side of things just by being there, and also the creative aspect of it all. And the difference between the trailer industry and the feature film industry in regards to post-production is trailer houses are basically a creative agency, an editorial house. They do color correction, sound design and mix, motion graphics and visual effects somewhat, all in one location.
In the service of creating one of these trailers from all these raw materials.
Exactly. So when you produce and create a trailer and edit a trailer and then finish a trailer, really that's a microcosm of a feature film. There's nothing in a trailer that's not in a feature film and vice versa. I mean, it's just a condensed version of a long form. So because I spent some time there, a couple of years there, and then I moved over to a company called Simmerman Bacon O'Brien, which did the same thing and kind of moved up the ranks at this other company. I got familiar with all the various aspects of post-production, the editing, the color, the visual effects, the sound, and the delivery of these assets. So to me, that was just normal. Because remember, I just came from being like this actor, kid, waiter into this post-production environment. And for me, it just made sense. And it was just normal that, of course, all these things will happen under one roof. And so when I started getting into features and realizing, wait a minute, why are they editing in Burbank? Why are they doing visual effects in Studio City? Why are they doing color in Santa Monica and sound somewhere else? Like, it did make sense to me how there were all these sort of ancillary brick and mortar studios when I was used to everything happening under one roof. So that's the model that I do here at Sugar Studios. But just to get back to just my background a little bit, I went to a company called Cimarron Bacon O'Brien in the early 90s. I spent about 8 years there. I started there as just an assistant, a post assistant, not an assistant editor, a post production assistant, where we put labels on tapes. We did watch downs. We did kind of in-house quality control checks and basically assisted the whole process. And then I got into learning the Avid and that whole process, and I was editing a little bit on my own, but became an assistant editor to editors. And then I ended up becoming in the finishing department, where we would do online of the TV spots. We would go to these facilities like Editel and Hollywood Digital and Post Logic, which are all pretty iconic sort of post finishing houses in the 90s. They've all pretty much been unified at this stage. So I learned the process of what it takes to get it from the offline stage to either broadcast, and even more interesting for me was to theatrical. So I was a finishing supervisor by the time I left there and started my own company, but we would have to go to film, even in the late 90s when it was digital editing. Trailers and theaters weren't digital projection at that point. People kind of lose sight of the fact that, yeah, there was non-linear editing in the 90s, but there was not a plethora of digital projection in the theater. So whatever we did on the Avid had to get traced back to the original camera negative or a dupe of that negative. And we'd have to conform these sequences so that they could play in a 35 millimeter release print could play into a theater. So film is very complex. And in fact, even to this day, with all the digital technology, even though film is more tangible and more analog and visceral, it was, to this day, still more complex. It took me a long time to learn the concept of film finishing. And digital doesn't come close, in my mind, to being as complex as what it took to deal with the labs and the optical houses and all that whole process. So anyway, I learned the technical side of things in a pretty hardcore way, and also had a creative instinct that I utilized. So, and I think those two things that I possessed of sort of a technical know-how and a creative instinct for certain, cuts, led me to be able to be a pretty effective producer of things, because I can assess how long things would take and how much they would cost, but also contribute in some way to the creative of that as well. So when I started Sugar Studios, basically, in essence, what I did was I took the model of everything under one roof, where we have numerous edit bays. We have, 14 edit bays, a bunch of sound design rooms, sound editing rooms, color suites, and a Dolby Atmos stage for mixing and also for 4K color correction. So I just took this model of what I was used to coming up in the 90s and created it strictly for independent feature films. Because along the way, when you're in this business long enough, I've been in it quite a long time, you get a lot of opportunities as things come and evolve in technology. You get a lot of opportunities to go off into different avenues, different areas of this industry. I'm talking, virtual reality, commercials, music videos, industrial videos, sales videos, trailers, sizzles. There's so many short films, there's all these things that can derail you, that derailed me from my core direction now, and which has been for the last 11 years here at Sugar Studios, which is, what, I'm gonna stay in my lane. We're gonna focus on independent feature films, whether they're scripted or documentaries. And this has been a reason I feel that we are, have a good reputation out there and have a lot of repeat and referrals, is because we are a feature film house. We're an independent feature film house, and we work really well with independent film producers, and we work well with the independent feature budgets.
GJ, when you referenced how all of these post-production facilities were spread out in the way, is that a consequence of how major studio productions were doing post-production at the time? Or what other contribution led to this spot where things were as around town as you described it?
Well, I think it's because, look, I mean, like I said, I have a unique skill set or a unique background because of the fact that I started in the theatrical marketing in part of this industry where everything was under one roof. But traditionally, people coming into the industry are, they're choosing sound, they're mixers, they're sound designers, they're Foley artists, or they're colorists, or they're editors. So their background and their history is pretty much relegated to that aspect of post-production. So I think you've got some talented mixers and you've got a producer and you're like, hey, let's start an audio house. So you get these amazing sound houses because they've got these killer people who their whole life was, their whole career is just mixing and sound design. So they're going to naturally go into starting a sound studio, right? And the same goes for all the other areas as well, for picture. So there's not a lot of crossover for technicians where you could have a colorist who's also, not that we do that here. I'm not going to say our colorist knows audio and our audio people know color. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that from where I'm sitting, because I'm familiar with being a post supervisor in all these various areas, that I can unify all these various skill sets under one roof and manage the process and make sure all the departments are talking to each other in a seamless way. But I think that's why there's these individual houses is by merely the fact that that's what the founders of these companies, their history is.
Well, and I would imagine for an indie feature, there are costs, both financial and just as far as coordination, that could be a barrier of entry for some of these smaller films. Is that a fair challenge that these films face with that system of specialized houses?
Yeah, I see that a lot where there's, I mean, look, it's an incredible accomplishment for a lot of these films that are able to, by the time I see the footage, that's from years from when somebody said, hey, I want to put pen to paper and write a script. Then that takes some time. And then they have to raise the money. So they're going to go to either investors, friends, or family or whatnot. And then they get the money. And then they actually go into pre-production, are able to assemble a crew and get the permits needed, or not get the permits, but get on set. So by the time it gets to me, regardless of the quality of it, I have the utmost respect for any filmmaker that comes to me and says, look, they've got enough footage here based on, their script. And that's from day one, I have the utmost respect, regardless of what it is. And just the fact that they could have done that, accomplished that. But I think what the novice filmmaker doesn't always anticipate is the need for post supervision, because when you're asked skid like these various houses in various locations, on the face of it, it makes total sense, and it does make sense. I'm not saying it doesn't, because there's amazing vendors out there. Company 3 is amazing. These sound houses, Formosa Group, there's amazing places out there. I'm not going to deny it, but the independent film producer needs someone to be able to manage all these various places and all these various processes. And that can be expensive, that can be time consuming, and it can also, without the proper planning and anticipation, or without the proper ability to foresee problems that may arise, you could get stuck in a situation that costs a lot of money. If you schedule a color session before all your visual effects are completed, you're kind of screwed, because and that happens sometimes. We'll see that. Well, guys, we can't schedule the color until all the VFX are completely approved by you guys. Otherwise, they're going to have to come back. And the same thing goes with audio. What people don't realize, oh, well, let's get the mix out of the way. We got a lot of visual effects, but how are we going to sound design and mix a feature if not all of the gun muzzle flashes are in place in the footage or any other visual effects that's sound dependent, so there's definitely an order of things that needs to happen. And that's something that we do here is post supervision and post management is just built in at Sugar Studios, because everything is here and we oversee everything. We have a really tight, good staff team of amazing, talented artists. I will say that in the beginning, I realized that this sort of quote unquote all-in-one model sort of connotated a compromise in some way. Like people kind of felt like, well, they know if they go to a house that specializes in audio, that specializes in only audio, they're going to get better quality. Or a house that's just a color house, they're going to get better quality or results from that. But what we've really strived to do here is put in place these A-list amazing artists in each of these departments at Sugar Studios. So there's absolutely, not only is there not a compromise, you're getting the benefit of our artists here that are in staff here. So it's actually it's worked out really well. And that in conjunction with the renaissance of streaming platforms and the type of content that's being produced for these streaming platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, we just happen to be in the right place at the right time and prepared for that type of content. So fortunately, we're doing really well. And sadly, I know a lot of people aren't right now. So a lot of people that are struggling from the strike repercussions and depleted budgets here and there, and shoots getting put off till next year. But while I feel really bad, I've got to be grateful as well that we're busy and putting out really great work here.
Well, Gijo, give me a sense of how Sugar Studios has grown over the last decade and change, what it was when you founded, and then sort of where that growth came from and where it is now.
In 2011, I leased a small office in the Wiltern building tower, in the Wiltern Theater Tower on Wilshire and Western. And at the time, I was focusing on sizzle trailers because my background was trailers and sizzles, which trailers created from movies that aren't shot yet, basically is what I was specializing in, because I had a vast knowledge of films and a good memory for dialogue in various movies. I had a huge database of 1,000 movies and whatnot. So I would work with a lot of writers and producers who had these scripts that they were pitching to get investments. So I really focused on just doing sizzles at that time. So I leased an office here, and I had a laptop and I had a little monitor, and it was just me. I was editing on Final Cut 7, which to this day, Final Cut 7 has a place in my heart. Nothing after that in Final Cut, but I will say that Final Cut 7, it meant a lot to a lot of people. And I think there should be, if there isn't, a strong following for Final Cut 7. But anyway, I just had Final Cut 7 on a laptop. I taught myself Final Cut. I knew Avid, but I taught myself Final Cut. I started cutting some sizzles in this office. And with every project that I got, I would go to festivals, writing festivals, different film festivals. I would just go anywhere to try and meet people and hustle business from writers and producers. And one sizzle led to another. And basically every project that I got, half of the money I would either buy a piece of equipment, I just put it back into the company, and slowly but surely just kept building and building and building. And then I started bringing in some people to help, and eventually I took over more space and ended up overtaking the entire floor on the 9th floor. So in 4 years, I ended up going from one office to the entire floor. And then 3 years later, got the penthouse at the Wiltern Theater Tower and gutted that and built our 20-seat Dolby Atmos 4K theater for mixing in Atmos in 5.1 and 7.1, and also for 4K P3 theatrical color correction as well. So it's a dual purpose room. It's a fantastic theater in the penthouse of the Wiltern. And then just last year, finished construction on the 8th floor, where it's primarily a main reception area, and six edit bays in a kitchen and a conference room. So we have 3 full floors at the Wiltern now. But that's basically how it did. It was basically with every job that came in, I just put the money back into the company. And for the first 10 years, I lived very lean with my wife. We lived in a studio apartment right around the corner in Koreatown. And we just, everything we did was just putting it into the company. And so we could afford the right people and the right equipment and created Sugar Studios. It's been an evolutionary process. And we're at a really good space right now. We've got 16 staff employees and numerous Permalance employees. We have a whole audio division in London run by sound supervisor Nick Dixon out in the UK. So we can service some European clients as well. And there's a whole team out there. So we've expanded, but we haven't expanded too much too soon. We've always sort of just expanded to the point where we can handle it. So that's why we're in a good spot right now.
And Gijo, can you share with our listeners maybe some specific projects that have come through Sugar Studios, and perhaps even where there were challenges that the approach of this post-production supervision actually helped the project?
We have a film right now, or actually it was just at TIFF, a documentary that we did, all the post on here at Sugar Studios for QC Entertainment. It's a film about the Vice network. It's called Vice is Broke. It's about the rise and fall of the Vice network. And that was a documentary written and directed by Eddie Huang, who's a fantastic guy to work with. That's one of our most recent ones that come to mind. And, we were in edit, I believe, for 6 or 7 months, and a lot of archival footage, a lot of graphics needed for that film, a lot of photos that needed to get restored through AI and also digital backgrounds and animations put on these graphics and titles. And I mean, I would say one of the ways that I can think of off the top of my head where our model really worked for that was during our mix session, because we're pushing to get to TIFF, right? So we had to get this right. For a documentary, as we all know, documentaries take a lot longer than scripted features. So we're a bit under the gun. So certain things we noticed during the final mix that, oh, you know what? Maybe the director wanted to reread his voiceover in a different way during the mix. So we put him down to the vocal booth and brought it right in there. Another, that just happened during the mix. Everything's connected via servers. So he could go down to another room, record, it gets dumped right into the session. Also, there was some visual effects, some graphics that when we saw it on the big screen, we noticed, maybe the director felt that there were certain tweaks he wanted to make to some graphics. And he called it out during the mix. And while they're mixing, it was happening, in another part of the company. We were revising the graphics. We revised it, put it on a server. It got dropped into the cut and then got into the session. So by the end of the day, he could see a revised graphic during a mix session, which, is pretty unheard of. And that's happened a lot with other projects where we'll be in color and there's perhaps a visual effects shot that isn't perfect or is being noticed. Once you put it on a high-res HDR monitor, you're going to see things that you don't always see when you're reviewing and approving these shots. So being that we have our in-house visual effects department, during the color session, we were able to revise some visual effects and plug them right back into the resolve session in real time, same day. Whereas if it wasn't under one roof, and I've seen this happen, I've experienced this as well, as I'm sure most other people listening to this who are either editors or post supervisors or colorists will know, if there's an issue with the visual effects, you've got to reach out to the visual effects company and you've got to, get it done over there, and then they've got to upload it, then you got to download it, then it's got to be put into the session, and it's got to, there's about 10 steps in different parts of the city or world that need to come together for that shot to end up back in your cut correctly. That happens all the time where clients are just super happy that they can just walk from one floor to another, and then all of a sudden they're in a whole different department and everything's connected and unified with our servers. We have a massive 2,000 terabyte server. Combined, we have about 2,100 terabytes of storage here between Nexus and a QNAP NAS, Facilis, and a SAN server as well for our finishing. So we've got quite a bit of fast storage here. So we can manage a lot of stuff here. But technically, it saves a lot of time. And independent films need those savings. They need both the schedule savings and they also need the financial convenience as well.
Well, Gigi, I know there's a lot of talk these days about challenges the film industry is facing. There's a lot of talk about production leaving LA or just a drop in production in general. And a lot of people are concerned about AI. I'd really like to get your take both on how you think these things are going to affect the industry overall and what it means for indie house like Sugar Studio specifically.
Yeah, that's been not just recent either. There's been other states that have offered really great tax incentives, in other countries as well. I mean, that's been going on for a long time for LA-based production. So while production does go to different states where there are very favorable tax incentives and rebates, for post, it hasn't been a huge detriment to us as far as post-production because even if a state like Atlanta or Buffalo, New York, or other countries can offer a very, very enticing tax incentive for post-production, there are other factors to consider as well. And that is, does the director want to go back to that state for the post process? Because, directors like this, they need to cut with their editors, So it hasn't been a huge thing. And plus, I think that the people who are most active and successful and I don't want to say talented because I don't want to disparage any out of state or out of country artists, but if most of the talent is here in Los Angeles, and for feature films, it's Los Angeles for post-production. Post-production houses cannot, I have not seen any really thrive in other cities other than Los Angeles for long form feature film post-production because there's just not that amount, even in New York. And primarily these houses that are around the country can do feature film post-production. They have the technical equipment to do feature post, and they have some people that might perhaps be familiar with the workflow of feature post-production, but their bread and butter primarily, I would say, is short form commercials. You got great commercial houses in Detroit, and you have in New York, of course, and even Austin, Texas, and these other states can thrive and support themselves and make a good business out of doing product marketing and other types of short form production as well. But for long form scripted features, especially, I just see that it's just inherently, it's Los Angeles, it's Hollywood. This is where everyone is. If your goal and your dream is to become a feature film editor, you're most likely going to end up here. There's just more people here. So whereas production does go out of state, of course, but we still end up a lot of times doing the post here because the directors and the producers really don't want to go back to the place where they shot to spend the 8 to 16 weeks of post-production. It does happen, but just not as often as you would think.
So, Gigi, it sounds like even though there is production flight, Sugar Studios is staying very busy.
You know what? We're busy in all areas. We have editors cutting movies. We have a lot of films going on right now, and we typically average between 10 and 20 movies at any given time. But they're all at different phases of development. While I may have 3 films right now that are in editorial, I have, 5 that are in visual effects. I have 3 that are in ready to color. And then I have another 5 or 6 that are on the schedule for a final mix, which means that our sound teams, our prep teams are busy. Our sound editors are extremely busy. So, I mean, sound, ironically, is what people don't realize is the lengthiest part we find in post-production for features. It's the sound. You've got to go through and do all clean and edit all the dialogue. There's a lot of ADR that's involved with features that require a lot of scheduling of actors who are on sets in different parts of the world. So there's a whole coordinating of ADR talent. which is a schedule killer for post because we can't mix again until we have all of our ADR in place. And then there's sound design, and then there's the composer that needs a good amount of time. And pretty much every aspect of the post process is happening simultaneously on different films.
Gigi, I also want to get your opinion on AI. There are people who think it's going to be another amazing tool. Just as we talked about moving from film to digital and other changes in the film industry, this is going to help us. And there's other people that consider it an existential threat to a lot of the jobs. Give me a sense of how you think this is going to evolve.
Well, there's always something that comes along where people fear that they're going to get replaced by this new technology. And you know what? It does happen. It's happened in the auto industry. It's happened in a lot of industries. But AI has been useful in a number of different areas in post-production. With audio, it's helped us in voice matching. For instance, this documentary we were just doing, we used AI to restore a lot of photos, and that was pretty miraculous. And AI is being used primarily right now. We see it a lot in the audio department. I'm not fully prepared to talk about the full future of AI because I'm still waiting to see how it's going to play out in job threatening areas. But as it is right now, it's just really helped to enhance certain processes and streamline certain processes. It saved a lot of time in certain areas. But I will say I don't feel that there's ever going to be a replacement for especially in our industry, that's a real creative endeavor. When you have something that's where you need to collaborate with a human, I don't see AI getting in the way of that. AI has obviously helped with storyboarding and mapping out certain environments visually, amazing things that are happening in that respect. But like, for example, during the pandemic, the remote workflow really became prevalent. Pre-pandemic, it was a bit more clunky, a bit more complicated. You needed hardware to be able to have a remote collaboration session with clients in the post teams. So during the pandemic, when everyone was, really engaging in remote collaboration, of course, I had thoughts, oh no. What if the brick and mortar post-production edit suites are a thing of the past because people seem to be real comfortable with doing the remote workflows? Once the pandemic ended, I felt like people were dying to get back. They want to get into a room with the editor. They wanted that human interaction. And I think as humans, I think that our instinct is to collaborate with other humans. And while we can use AI and it's going to only get better to help streamline a lot of these processes, I don't see AI taking over post-production because there'll always be that need for human interaction. And when you're in a creative field like we are, there's no, you got to be able to bounce ideas back and forth and explore areas that will work and explore areas that don't work. So I'm not being that the remote workflow during the pandemic didn't kill us. It's like we're right where we were before and only getting better. So I think as long as we stay with the people, I don't think people should be too afraid that an editor is going to get replaced by AI.
Well, I really like to end on a positive note. Gigi, I think on that we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Skid. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, blowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Gigi, if people want to learn more about Sugar Studios and the services you provide, where should they go?
Well, you can check out our website at sugarstudios.com. It's all there.
Also a great place to check out the other features you've worked on. And I found a lot of info. The site's really, really well done. Thanks again.
Thank you. Take care.
My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.